When we're talking about the economy, we often talk about the economy in these four sectors. And it's not a very creative way to talk about those sectors. It's the primary sector, the secondary sector, the tertiary sector, and the quaternary sector, essentially the first, second, third, and fourth sectors. What are we talking about in those sectors? Well, again, I would like for you to be able to listen when you listen to a jobs report or the State of the Union or something, and people to talk about the economy in these terms, or think about what it is that they're talking about when it comes up. When we talk about those resources, there are a number of types of resources, and I've mentioned these resources kind of in passing. Again, you know them, and it's just that we're trying to put them all in a nice little bow at this point. We've got primary sources. Sorry. We've got natural resources. We've got manufactured goods. We've got services, and we've got essentially information and data. Natural resources. That's anything that we get out of the ground, anything that grows naturally when we plant it, things that we find and extract. Once we have natural resources, what we try to do is transform those natural resources into something that can be used. People don't usually buy bales of cotton, they buy fabric or clothes that are made of cotton, right? But think about that same thing that we talked about with social change over time. One of the things that is part of those resources is services. And a great example that I like to always bring up is once we moved away from these agricultural sort of setups and we all moved into the center city, and now our parents have to go to work, right? We talked about this when we were talking about education, for instance. Now that our parents go to work, what do we do with the children? Well, now we need a formal way to hold them down during the day. A whole lot of people are responsible for education. Why don't we make those same formal education institutions also responsible for childcare or have early childcare daycare centers, right? Sometimes what we need is to manage resources that are services. We need there to be some childcare. Now that we've got companies and crops that are moving across the world all the time and resources that are being managed and exchanged across the globe, now we need accountants. Now we need lawyers to handle our disputes. Now we need lawyers and union representatives to make sure that we keep our workers safe. We need secretaries and administrative assistants and receptionists. We need all kinds of services that have nothing to do with those natural resources that we get out of the ground or the way that we manufacture those natural resources. Heck, one of those resources are the people. We need somebody to manage hiring and firing people or training people, right? So we've got natural resources, manufactured goods, professional services, and now in this society, we've got a lot of data and a lot of information that needs to be managed and understood and exchanged and stored or kept and used, just all kinds of resource types, right? Well, this is what we're talking about when we not only are we talking about those multitude of resources, but now we're talking about the production of those resources. And as we've said, the distribution of those resources, and the consumption of those resources, the whole system, everything that is involved there. This is why we sometimes talk about the economy in these four sectors. If we're talking about the primary sector, we're talking about those natural resources, those labor efforts, the work involved, or the jobs that are in the sector of economy that deals with natural resources. So farming or drilling, people and jobs and labor opportunities or whatever that is concerned with natural resources, oil, miners, drillers, farmers, right? That's the primary sector. In the secondary sector, we're talking about that part of the economy that is concerned with the manufacturing of goods. So again, we don't use the cotton and keep it as the cotton that we get off the plant. We figure out how to manufacture it into something that is usable. How are we turning that cotton into fabric? We're not talking about the oil that we get out of the ground. We're talking about how do we use that oil and turn it into the gasoline that we use in our cars, right? So how do we extract the metal that we need from the ground and turn it into the things that we use to build our cars? That is the secondary sector concerned with the manufacturing of goods. The tertiary sector is, as you might imagine, coming up next, the portion of the society or the jobs or the labor efforts concerned with those services. Again, think about that shift. We've moved from people being self-sustaining to now this economy happening across the entirety of the society. And now we've got to figure out how to distribute the things that people need. We produce them, and then we have to distribute them so that people can consume them. So the tertiary sector of society is concerned with goods, healthcare, management, childcare, all kinds of services that have nothing to do with the natural resources or the manufacturing of the natural resources. Somebody has to manage the company that is dealing with the natural resources or the manufacturing of the national resources. Those are services. And in this post-industrial age, the quaternary sector, as you can imagine, is that area concerned with producing ideas, research that leads to new technologies, so that we can figure out how to do our primary sector work better. How do we make the crops that we grow, how do we grow them more than we did last season? How do we make sure that we have less loss due to disease? Like all kinds of things that we're doing in research and development in that quaternary sector, dealing with the work of the mind and technological research and development. So we're always moving forward. We're always trying to figure out how to move the society forward, often because we're talking about how to do the things that we do better in the whole of the system, in using the resources that we have, figuring out how to manage and exchange those resources. And so I want to remind you, I told you that it was on the whiteboard in the last video. Max Weber talks about this idea that we are moving forward through the development of our ideas, and that we want to become more efficient. We want to be good about the decisions that we're making so that we're pushing society forward. It's not exactly this thing, but if you think about the sectors of the economy, we're talking about sort of the life of something from the moment that it has come out of the ground to the ways that it is progressing through the rest of society. I do want to make sure that I remind you of this idea of globalization. Again, a concept that we've seen before that I promised would come up again. Globalization often is part of our conversations about the economy because it's stuff that you might not have thought about it, but it makes perfect sense. It's simply the process of integrating governments, for instance, integrating governments, cultures, or financial systems through international trade. And so instead of trading within your own community, for instance, or trading within your own society, the moment that you and your 1,000 friends who develop a society make a trade with another society of 1,000 friends, again, I'm at the river and you're at the mountains, that's globalization, right? You said, I've got my own society, my own market that I need to be concerned with, my own economy. Once I make some development or sense of how I can enrich my economy by trading with you and vice versa, then we are engaging essentially in what we call globalization. The fact is that we've created a market or an economy that is composed of societies, countries, nations around the world. And it comes with that ability to trade the things that we need. But we've talked about this very briefly, talking about culture. The thing that's also being traded are those cultural ideas, for instance. That's what globalization is about. When we talked about that shift from um, hunter-gatherer to horticultural and pastoral to agricultural to industrial and post-industrial. One of the things that I remember saying, or wanted to make sure that that made the point of, particularly looking at that video from the Babies movie, is that when you look at an agricultural society, our cultural bias usually wants to look at them like they're behind the times, they're backward, there's something about them. They have not yet advanced the way that we are. And there's some validity in talking about whether or not they want to advance and they can't for a lot of reasons, or the ways that we have taken advantage of them, and that's why we can advance. But you will find societies that are in different areas or different sort of time positions on that movement, if you think about it in that linear kind of progression way. What's important about that, particularly when it becomes a question of globalization, is that we can make the decision to put our investment into things that are more industrial or more into things that are post-industrial. And when we do that, what we might be doing is also making a decision that I'm going to rely on societies that are still in an agricultural phase, or societies that have chosen to put their time and investment in agriculture, right? This is critical when you hear people say, again, I just want your ear to be listening to this thing that you hear people talk about all the time. When you understand these structures, they make better sense. When we say things like, oh no, all of our jobs have left, or all of our jobs are now overseas. We've outsourced all our jobs to Mexico or the Caribbean. In some ways, that's exactly what has happened, maybe without all the connotation or maybe negative connotation, or maybe that's not the whole story. But when you think about those sectors, these primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary sector positions, when one looks in the classifieds, for instance, they're going to find a certain number of jobs in the primary sector, a certain number in the secondary sector, and so forth. And if you live in a rural area, for instance, you might find lots of job opportunities in the primary and secondary sectors. In the city of Rockford, for instance, where a lot of you know, our hard work is in the secondary sector, a very highly manufacturing service, a highly manufacturing town. Well, when we decide that what we want to do, for instance, is put our time and investment to make sure that the people of Rockford, for instance, are more trained in these service kinds of industries, professional industries like law or accounting, or those are the two that I always go to. Or if we say the world is changing in such a way that we need to make sure that the people of Rockford have opportunities to train and do things that will make them marketable in the quaternary sector. We need more people studying in these STEM fields so that they can go into computer science and go into cybersecurity, because that's where the jobs are, right? It's not so much that we made our jobs go away as it is, if you think about it, what we're saying is we want our economy to be heavier in the tertiary areas, in the tertiary sector, or maybe the quaternary sector. And what that might mean is you might find, and we've seen this around here, I'm not originally from Rockford, so forgive me for no details, but sort of blanket statements. You might see a factory that used to be a manufacturing factory in that secondary sector of the economy that gets transformed so that it can serve a different purpose. Or maybe it just gets closed down and you take those manufacturing tasks to somewhere else, a society that is focused on manufacturing, or an agricultural society that is starting to build their manufacturing. And you say, why don't you make that thing? And I can spend my time and money training people in these more tertiary ways or in these more quaternary ways. That's a very blanket way to sort of paint the picture that says when you listen to job reports, or when you think about where your job prospects are, or when you think about how your society is made up, how your town's economy looks, you're going to find that some places are very much focused in those natural resources, maybe because they're on the river and that's clearly the thing that they're focused on. or more secondary types of things, because that's what their strength is. If you're rural or manufacturing, those are the things that you're going to find. And if you are in those areas and you want a job in cybersecurity, maybe you're not going to find a job there because that's not where the investments are. There are no cybersecurity headquarters in that rural town, for instance. So that's not what you're going to see. So always go back to this thing when you hear these debates or you hear these arguments or these reports about the labor market and new jobs that are being created and what sector of the economy are they being created in, or how you see some sectors growing and some sectors sort of declining in some areas and growing in other areas. It's the same conversation about this social institution that is concerned with how we are managing and exchanging these resources. Those resources are natural resources, manufactured goods, services, and now data and information. We've got to figure out how to produce it, how to distribute it, and how to make it available for consumption. And we're always going to be concerned with how we're doing with that. Remember, all of our social institutions, if we're doing it well, then our society is going to be healthy. If we're not doing it well, we're not going to be healthy. But we're always talking about those questions. So it's worth knowing what those sectors are and even what it means for us to be a globalized society, because in order for something to be made in the USA, it mostly just means that it needs to be manufactured in the USA. Every single one of those natural resources, the materials for the soles, the materials for the shoestrings, the materials for the shoe itself, we can create an entire set of sneakers, Nike and Converse. We can get every resource that we need from somewhere else and manufacture it here and say that it's made in the US. One of the things that comes out of globalization is this sort of cultural xenophobia, where we have a fear or a dislike for anything that comes from a foreign land. I don't want to buy anything made in China. I don't want to buy anything made in Vietnam or made in Bangladesh, because we tend to believe that if it was made there, then we have taken our jobs away and put them over there. And what we could have done is made it here. Well, there's a lot of validity in that as well. But when we chose to make it there and put our manufacturing tasks there, usually it's because we made some decision to focus here on something else. We're always talking about, is this a good idea? Are we moving forward in our society in these economic decisions that we're talking about? Are we making those kinds of choices about our technologies, about the ideas on how we can do better, how we can be more efficient, so that we can continue to move forward as a society? And if we focus in a particular way, it means that we may not focus so much in the other way, but that doesn't mean that we still don't need those things. What we might do is just enter into agreements so that our system is managing the exchanges with other countries in this global market, for instance, to get what we need that way, or they get what they need that way. So that's that. One more video in this chapter coming right up.